Your last name is Santos, Cruz, Reyes, de la Cruz, Garcia. You think it's a Spanish Catholic name. Your whole life, you've identified as Filipino with Spanish heritage. DNA test comes back, 30% Chinese. You're shocked. How? My name is Spanish. My family's been Catholic for generations. Here's what nobody told you. In the 1800s, Spain forced Chinese immigrants in the Philippines to adopt Spanish surnames or face persecution. Your Spanish name is actually hiding Chinese blood. 20% of Filipinos have Chinese DNA, but most have no idea. Because Spain made Chinese Filipinos invisible by erasing their names. You're walking through Manila's Binondo district. The air smells of incense and siopao. Street signs display both Spanish surnames and Chinese characters. A Filipino family celebrates both Christmas and the Lunar New Year. But here's the mystery that historians tried to bury for centuries. Why do genetic studies show that nearly 20% of Filipinos carry Chinese DNA? More shocking, why did the Spanish colonial government try to hide this? And what happened to the Chinese traders who arrived centuries before Magellan ever set foot in the Philippines? Today we're uncovering a hidden history, the story of the Sangley, the Chinese merchants who didn't just trade with Filipinos, they became Filipinos. The forgotten arrival. Let's rewind to the 9th century, over 600 years before Spain colonized the Philippines. While Europe was in the Dark Ages, Chinese trading junks were already sailing to the Philippine archipelago. But here's what they don't teach in history books. These weren't just casual trading missions. Archaeological evidence from Butuan shows Chinese traders established permanent settlements. They married local women. They had children. They taught the locals advanced porcelain making and silk weaving. The Chinese called the Philippines Ma-ai, the land of gold. And they were right. The Philippines had gold, pearls, and exotic woods that Chinese emperors craved. In return, they brought porcelain, silk, and most importantly, a commercial revolution. By the 13th century, before Spain, before America, before anyone else, Chinese Filipino communities were already thriving in Luzon, Mindoro, and Sulu. Our goal on this video is to get 500 likes. Share your reaction in the comment and subscribe the channel, turn on bell notifications. The Sangley, neither Chinese nor Filipino. Now here's where the story gets fascinating. When the Spanish arrived in 1565, they found something unexpected. Thousands of Chinese merchants already living in Manila, speaking Tagalog, married to local women, running the entire economy. The Spanish called them Sangley, a corruption of the Hokkien word Sangley, meaning business or trader. But the Sangley were in an impossible position. Think about it. They were too Chinese for the Spanish, too Filipino for China, and too Catholic for traditional Chinese society. They existed in a liminal space, a third identity. The Spanish needed them desperately. The Sangley controlled 90% of retail trade. The blacksmith industry, making weapons and tools, food supply chains, banking and credit systems. Without the Sangley, the Spanish colony would collapse within weeks. But this dependency bred resentment and fear. Quick thing, I'm building a database of Filipino surnames that are actually hiding Chinese ancestry. Santos, Cruz, Reyes, we know these, but there are dozens more people don't realize are converted Chinese names. If your last name is Filipino and you've taken a DNA test that shows Chinese ancestry, drop your surname in the comments. Just the surname. Let's crowdsource the real list, and if you want more videos uncovering hidden Filipino history, the Parian, the original Chinatown. In 1581, Spanish governor Gonzalo Ronquillo made a decision that would shape Filipino-Chinese relations for centuries. He created the Parian. The Parian was a walled ghetto just outside Intramuros, Manila's Spanish heart. Here's the twisted logic. Keep the Chinese close enough to use them, but far enough to control them. But the Parian became something the Spanish never intended. A vibrant hybrid culture was born here. Chinese men married indigenous Filipino women. Intermarriage was encouraged because Chinese women rarely migrated. Their children, called Mestizo de Sangley, spoke Hokkien at home, Tagalog in the streets, and Spanish in church. They celebrated the Feast of San Lorenzo and the Moon Festival. They ate adobo with chopsticks. They were creating something entirely new, Chinese-Filipino identity. But here's the dark part. The history books skip over. The massacres they don't teach. Between 1603 and 1639, the Spanish colonial government orchestrated at least 3 major massacres of Chinese residents. The worst was in 1603. The trigger? A rumor. Spanish authorities heard that a Chinese Mandarin was coming to conquer Manila. Paranoia spread like wildfire. The Spanish governor ordered a preemptive strike. Over 20,000 Chinese were slaughtered in a single month. Let that sink in. 20,000 people. Entire families. Merchants who had lived in Manila for generations. Men married to Filipino women. Their mestizo children. But here's the historical irony. Within 2 years, the Spanish were begging Chinese merchants to return. Why? The economy had completely collapsed. No one knew how to run the businesses. The food supply chain was broken. Spanish soldiers were starving. The Sangley returned, and the cycle of dependence, resentment, and violence continued. The Mestizo Revolution. By the 18th century, something remarkable happened. The Mestizo de Sangley became the Philippines' economic elite. These Chinese-Filipino mestizos weren't fully accepted by either Spanish or pure Chinese communities, so they did something brilliant. They created their own power structure. They dominated inquilinos, land lease middlemen, comerciantes, merchant class, craftsmen guilds, provincial trade networks. Names like Cojuangco, Palanca, Gokongwei, Sai. These weren't originally Spanish or Filipino names. They were Chinese names that evolved. Cojuangco comes from the Hokkien Ko Keng Ko. Gokongwei from Go Kong Hui. But here's the hidden history. Many prominent Filipino families during the Spanish era were actually Mestizo de Sangley who Hispanized their names to avoid discrimination. The name-changing strategy. In 1849, Governor Narciso Claveria issued the Catalogo Alfabético de Apellidos, forcing every Filipino to adopt a Spanish surname from an official list. For Chinese Filipino mestizos, this was both oppression and opportunity. Families with names like Tan, Lim, and Go suddenly became Torres, Lim Mendoza, and Gomez. It was cultural erasure, but it also allowed them to hide in plain sight, to escape the anti-Chinese discrimination, to move up in colonial society. By the late 1800s, you had a fascinating phenomenon. Filipino nationalists with Chinese blood fighting against Spain. José Rizal himself, the national hero, had Chinese ancestry through his mother's lineage. The mestizos weren't just present in the Philippine Revolution, they funded it, led it, and died for it. The 20th century waves, but the story doesn't end with Spanish colonization. 3 more waves of Chinese migration reshaped Filipino-Chinese identity. Wave 1, 1898 to 1935. After Spanish rule ended, American colonial policy was more lenient. New Chinese immigrants arrived from Fujian province, escaping poverty and warlord conflicts. Wave 2, 1945 to 1949. The Chinese Civil War. When Mao's communists won, wealthy Chinese merchants fled to the Philippines, bringing capital, business networks, and entrepreneurial culture. Wave 3, 1960s to 1980s. Integration period. Marcos's dictatorship ironically accelerated Filipino-Chinese integration through economic policies that favored business elites. By the end of the 20th century, Chinese Filipinos controlled an estimated 60 to 70% of the Philippine economy, while being only 1 to 2% of the population by pure ancestry. But remember that 20% genetic figure. That's because of centuries of intermarriage. Most Filipinos with Chinese DNA don't even know it. The genetic evidence. Recent DNA studies reveal the hidden truth. A 2021 genetic study found that approximately 18 to 22% of lowland Filipinos carry Chinese Y chromosome markers, meaning Chinese male ancestry. The highest concentrations are in Metro Manila, 35 to 40%, Pampanga, 25 to 30%, Iloilo, 20 to 25%, Cebu, 18 to 22%. But here's what's fascinating. The DNA tells a story of integration, not invasion. These genetic markers are old, many dating back 400 to 800 years. This wasn't colonial conquest. This was intermarriage, commerce, and cultural blending. Filipino culture itself absorbed Chinese elements so thoroughly that people don't recognize them anymore. Food, pancit, lumpia, siopao, mami, all Chinese-derived language, Tagalog words like kuya, ate, suki, business culture. The sari-sari store concept, Tongits card games, religion, folk Catholicism blended with Chinese ancestor veneration. The identity question today. Today, Filipino-Chinese identity is still evolving. If you ask young Filipino-Chinese millennials, "Are you Chinese or Filipino?" you'll get different answers. Some say, "I'm Filipino with Chinese heritage." Others say, "I'm Chinese-Filipino, both equally." Still others say, "I'm Filipino. My ancestors happen to be Chinese." And this reflects something profound. Identity isn't just about DNA. It's about culture, language, community, and choice. The children of Chinese merchants who arrived in the 9th century. They're Filipino. The Mestizo descendants of the Sangley. Filipino. The grandchildren of 1950s refugees. Filipino, also Filipino. But they carry within them a ghost identity, traces of a homeland many have never seen. A language some have forgotten. Traditions that blend so seamlessly they're invisible.